Hey guys, it's Christian, and in today's video I'm going to show you Coolify. This is an open source platform that lets you easily deploy any type of applications, services or databases on your own hardware. It's actually in the same category as something like Heroku or Vercel, which are both developer platforms that take your applications plus some settings and turn them into live deployments. Don't worry if you're not familiar with any of these platforms at all. In practice, it simply just means that you bring your application, which often is a Node.js, Python or Go project, and these of course all need an environment with runtime dependencies, environment variables, sometimes a database, and that is exactly where these platforms like Heroku or Vercel became so popular, because instead of manually setting up servers or dealing with deployment steps and release workflows, you typically just connect a Git repository where you upload the source code of your application, and these platforms will handle all the other steps for you. So they will build your application often in a container image and then deploy it in a large scaled cloud infrastructure. And they often also take care of domains, HTTPS certificates, versionings, rollbacks and stuff like that. Coolify is something like this too, but with a few important differences that make it especially interesting for home lab fans or self-hosting nerds like us. First of all is that you keep control of everything, so the applications actually run on your own servers, so you get the convenience of a modern platform as a service or serverless architecture, but without handing everything over to a third-party cloud vendor. And that isn't just great for privacy and data sovereignty. In most cases, it is also simply much cheaper to run applications on your own servers at home or even on your preferred and super cheap VPS provider instead of having to pay the huge cloud vendor bills. So that's why I thought it might be super interesting to take a look at it together. So let's install Coolify on two of my testing servers. After all, I've also got so many things to say about it, many good things, but also a few not so good things. So let's just run through the basics together, and at the end of the video you will have a good understanding about what Coolify actually is and whether you want to give it a try in your home lab as well. Now, before we jump right in, I also want to show you another amazing tool that helps you to manage all of your tech and home lab projects, because if you're trying to balance multiple projects and tasks like I do, it is really easy to lose track, and simple tools like spreadsheets or notebooks, they just don't do the job. And that is exactly where Monday.com jumps in. It's an all-in-one work platform for managing complex projects, for easy collaboration and also automating repetitive work. Monday.com is incredibly easy to use. Yeah, you can very intuitively create any type of to-do lists, add custom fields, or change priorities, and so many other things of your tasks and projects. What I personally absolutely love are the Kanban boards, because they provide you a great high-level overview of all the tasks and their status, where you can easily drag and drop items, and you can even create advanced workflows by linking boards and setting dependencies. This is really perfect for tracking open issues, prioritizing or delegating tasks across technical teams. And what tech people will also love is that you can easily write markdown-based documentation files directly in Monday.com and share this with your technical team. With the free plan of Monday.com, you already get up to 2 seats with free boards, unlimited docs, and 8 column types, which is great for smaller projects. But of course, if your project grows over time or you want to use it in larger teams and organizations, you can easily upgrade to higher plans as well to increase the features and integrate Monday.com into other systems, like use it for coordinating emails or sending out files and Slack messages. So to get started, you can try out Monday.com completely for free by heading to the link in the description box down below to get your projects organized today. Okay guys, so now let's get started with setting up Coolify. By the way, if you want to get more information about this project, then head over to the official website coolify.io. So there you can read all about the features, about the capabilities. There's also a nice page that explains the open source philosophy of the development and what that means to the project as a whole. There's of course also a link to the official documentation that we will later use to install this application. And by the way, there's one thing something that I probably should explain at first, because when you're reading this website and you're reading all the good news about the open source philosophy, the self-hosting, running everything on your own hardware, you might be a little confused by seeing this button cloud here next to self-hosted, and you might be wondering, how is this then different from something like a Heroku or Vercel, where you also have a cloud service offering? Well, the important difference is that although Coolify has a cloud service version, is that this actually just runs the main controlling platform of Coolify. So the cloud service just costs $5 a month, where you can easily connect 2 of your servers plus $3 per month for each additional server. So that means the main Coolify platform runs on a managed infrastructure, but for the actual applications to be deployed and running, you always have to bring your own servers. So there's no way in the cloud version of Coolify to deploy applications in a managed infrastructure. You always have to set up either your own servers or connect any virtual or dedicated servers you might be running on your favorite VPS provider. This might probably be the easiest way to run everything, because that of course makes things like the certificate management and stuff like that easier. But if you prefer to run completely everything on your own hardware, not just the application servers, but also the main Coolify platform, you can also choose to use the self-hosted version, which is, by the way, what we are doing in this video. So there you have full access to all features. There are no limitations or restrictions, but of course you need your own infrastructure for Coolify, which means you need one server for the main Coolify platform, plus you need at least 1 or more servers for the application deployments. Before you begin, you should check if your server meets the requirements. So you need a server with SSH access. That could be a virtual private server somewhere on a cloud provider. It could be dedicated server, a virtual machine, maybe running on your Proxmox environment. It could be even a Raspberry Pi or basically any other Linux-based operating system with SSH. The Linux distributions supported are mentioned here as well. So anything that is Debian-based, so Ubuntu, Debian, that will all work. Also Red Hat-based, SUSE, Arch Linux, Alpine, and even Raspberry Pi OS are supported with AMD 64 or ARM 64 CPU architecture. So that is good news. For the main Coolify server, you need at least 2 CPU cores, 2 gigs of RAM, and 30 gigabytes of storage. So these are the minimum hardware requirements. Of course, more is better, but yeah, that's what your server needs at least. And this is only for the main Coolify platform server, where you theoretically could also deploy applications on, but this is not really recommended. Recommended is that you have separate servers, which also could be virtual servers, Raspberry Pis or whatever, for running the actual production applications. And these usually need a little more resources. That of course very much depends on the resources that the actual applications require. So in this example setup, it's mentioned like 8 gigs of memory, 4 CPU cores, and 150 gigabytes of storage would be enough for these type of projects. So that is what you typically would want to run on a server like this. And there are also different installation methods. So you could run the quick installation script, which is what we're doing in this video. But if you prefer a more manual installation, if you want to have a little more control or customize the setup, you could also just download the actual Docker Compose files, and then you can also customize them a little if you want. But honestly, I think it is better to run the quick installation script. That's also recommended by the documentation, because this will set up everything for you. So it will prepare the server. You just have to log in as root user, configure SSH by following these guides, and set up your firewall. And then it's installing the Docker engine. It's downloading all the files completely for you. For this demo project, I have prepared these 2 virtual servers on my Proxmox environment. So here is the Coolify test server. So this will become the main controlling part with the minimum requirements mentioned in the documentation. And I've also added 1 virtual machine that is a little more powerful. That will later be the deployment server. Let's first of all start these virtual machines. By the way, these are both Ubuntu Linux servers, but of course you probably could also use any other operating system mentioned in the documentation. Okay guys, so first of all, I want to connect over SSH to the Coolify test server. And the next step is actually pretty simple. I will just copy this installation script and run it. Oh no, there's one thing that is super important for my setup. And this probably will only happen to just a few of you guys. But the main issue I had with Coolify is that this installation script will create a new Docker network. So for the containers that the Coolify server will need to run. and it will use a 10.0.0.0.8/8 network for this, which is super dumb because my internal network uses the same IP range. So all of my servers are in the 10.x00/16 networks. And this, of course, doesn't work if there is an internal Docker network in the same subnet than my physical networks. I know that probably not many of you will use a 10.x network in their home labs. Most of you will have 192.168, blah, blah, blah. And then it probably will never be a problem. However, if you have kind of a similar setup and you might fall in this trap, then you need to customize some of these settings here. So here in this documentation, it is described what you have to do. You just need to copy this here, modify the Docker address pool base. So in my case, I'm just going to set this to the default Docker IP pool size 172.16.0.0/12, and then the Docker address pool size is, you can set up 10, 20, depending on if you need more networks for your applications. And then you pass these variables to the installation script. Of course, I forgot to set this as root user, so I'm going to log in with root and then execute this here. All right. So now it's running the Coolify installer. This script will do everything for you. Sit back and relax. It will also tell you funny jokes or not so funny jokes. Honestly, I prefer more professional application installers. I think this is a little silly, but yeah. All right, so this went through all of the installation steps, checking the Docker configuration, downloading required files from the CDN, setting up environment variables. So it's doing many things in the background. And then it's installing Coolify. It's currently running the version 4.0.0 beta. So we are getting the latest and greatest, at least at the time of recording this video. So this might take a few minutes depending on my internet connection. Okay, so that has been finished. Now it's starting the containers, and so I think everything should work fine. By the way, if you want to modify the Compose project for whatever reason, you find all the files in the /data directory. So here's a new directory with Coolify where you find the applications, backups, databases. I think it's in source. So so here you have the Docker Compose files that will start the project and an upgrade script if you need that. But usually you don't have to touch the main Coolify server or the project at all. So I will just exit. And then you can simply access this platform by opening a new browser window and head over to the IP address or the DNS name of your server on the port 8000. All right, let's continue. Now you have to create your admin account, set up an email address, and type in a secure password. And now you can set up your first application server. You can choose a server type to deploy your applications and databases on. So I'm going to choose remote server. And now we, of course, need to set up SSH authentication. You could use an existing key if you already have a secure SSH key, or you could create a new key pair that you have to upload on your deploy server. So I think I'm just going to say generate new key pair. I'm going to give this a name, deploy server key. I think that's fine, created by Coolify, and this is a private RSA key and the public key that you can use. So the public key you have to upload to your deployment server. The private key is stored inside the Coolify application server. Of course, you need both key pairs to set up a secure SSH authentication. So let's just copy this one here and let's connect to my deploy server. I'm just going to open a secondary tab, Coolify test deploy server home.crave.de. Yes. So I'm also going to log in as root and navigate to the /root directory. So here you should see the .ssh directory, cd into this. And usually there is an authorized key file already existing here. If it isn't, then just create this file. Then it can be empty. That's fine. But in the case of an Ubuntu Linux distribution, you will have this in here. So this line here that prevents the root user from logging in over SSH directly. If you try that, you will get this error message here, so that you have to log in with that user here. So just remove the beginning line if it's existing, and then in the second line or below your other public SSH keys, just paste the Coolify generated SSH key and save the changes to the file. And then I'm just gonna click Save Key. And now we need to set up the server configuration. So here you need to give the server a name. Of course, I'm gonna set this to Coolify test deploy server. And the IP address of the server, I don't know. I'm just gonna check that out. I think it is 10.22.3. Ah, yeah, okay. 22.3, that's fine. Let's click on validate connection. So here, the Coolify server will automatically install the Docker engine if it is not present on the remote server, because any application that you deploy will usually be created in a Docker container. Therefore, it obviously requires the Docker engine. So let's click on start validation. Oh yeah, so server is not reachable. Permission denied, public key, password. Oh yeah, I forgot to do a few other things here. It's not so easy to log in with root user to a remote server. You just need to edit the etc. ssh sshd underscore config files. So here usually are your SSH server settings where you can change the port, the listening address, and stuff like that. It might be recommended if this is a cloud server that you set up something like a firewall so that only the public IP address or the internal IP address of your Coolify server can actually connect. But yeah, I'm not going to discuss this topic right now. I'm just going to set the permit root login and set this to yes. And now we just need to restart the SSH service by using systemctl restart SSH. And then let's go back to the Coolify server, click on retry validation, and that now should work. So now it's checking a few things, if the operating system is supported, if the prerequisites are installed and stuff like that, and then it starts installing the Docker engine, Docker Compose. And once that is done, you can start creating your first project and deploy your first resource, or just continue go to the dashboard. And now you're logged into the main Coolify's platform. Okay guys, so now that we have a running setup, we could theoretically already start deploying applications, building container images, and connect our Git repositories and stuff like that. But before we do that, I want to show you around and show you some important configuration settings in the Coolify's platform. Because Coolify does many things under the hood, and it assumes that you're doing these things in a specific way. If you don't, you might have some conflicts with existing setups. I will show you later how to fix some of these problems I ran into. But at first, I think we should tweak our self-hosted installation of Coolify, because one thing that really annoyed me at first was that we're still using an unencrypted connection on port 8000 to manage the main Coolify setup. Of course, if you're using the cloud hosted version of Coolify and just connect your local servers for application deployments, you will not have this issue, because they will manage HTTPS and all of that stuff for you. But if you like to run this completely on your own infrastructure, I think this is not a good setup by default. So therefore, we need to tweak a few settings here. So first of all, go to the main settings. So this is the instant-wide setting for Coolify, where you could set up a domain and give this Coolify platform a name. You also have the instance public IP address if you're running this on a VPS in the cloud. And you can also set some advanced settings like configuring DNS servers for validation and stuff like that. Here, we need to enter the fully qualified domain name of the instance, including HTTPS, if we want to secure the dashboard with HTTPS. So let's hit enter HTTPS and then just use this name here. Coolify test.home.ccreative.de. Let's just call it Coolify test. And the instance time zone, we're also going to update to Europe, Berlin. All right. Okay, so validating DNS failed. Make sure you have added DNS records correctly. Okay, so that, of course, is a problem because I didn't add this to my DNS server. But we can easily change this by going in here, this DNS validation, and add a custom DNS server. In my case, I'm using my local bind 9 DNS server where this record should be existing. Then you, by the way, should also change the instance public IP address if this is only routed locally. So I'm going to change this to 10.22.2. I think that's the IP address of that server here. Click on save. And then that should work. All right. So now I think we could open a new connection using HTTPS instead. Let's try this. All right, so the certificate is still not valid, but the reason for this is that it's by using a default HTTP challenge, so we didn't configure DNS challenge yet. But even though this is now throwing a certificate error, it is still using HTTPS correctly, so the data is at least encrypted. The next thing that you should also take a closer look at is the server's configuration. So on the left side, you have the dashboard, you have your projects, and your S3 storage, keys, tokens, and stuff like that. We will later go through some of these areas, but the server's configuration is also pretty important. Here you can configure both the local host, so the server where Coolify is running, and the Coolify's test deploy server. Here you can see that by default, Coolify is using traffic under the hood. And below here, this is the configuration file for the traffic reverse proxy of Coolify, which you could customize if you want. You could also switch the proxy from traffic to, I think, Caddy is also supported, or you could completely turn it off, which might be useful in scenarios where you already have an existing traffic reverse proxy running on your deployment server and you don't want to use the Coolify's traffic reverse proxy. You can also change other configuration settings of this server, like configuring the disk usage check, change the number of concurrent builds, change the private key. You can also import a CA certificate if you don't want to use Let's Encrypt. And what is also super cool, you can use Cloudflare Tunnel. If you want to make some applications that you're running locally behind your firewall easy accessible on the public internet with trusted TLS certificates, so then Cloudflare Tunnel is a nice addition to this. And there are also some other nice maintenance scripts like Docker cleanup. This will automatically remove any of the unused Docker images because they usually eat up a lot of space. And from time to time, you might get some notification your server's root disk is going to be full. So therefore, it is recommended to run a regular Docker cleanup job. You can manage this completely with Coolify. And you can also set up log drains to send service logs to third-party tools. And also what is super interesting, you can manage existing resources here. Then you have to switch from the managed resources to unmanaged. So then you would see all the Docker services that are running on your existing server, but are not managed by Coolify. Only for visibility, so you can't do much with that, but at least you can see them, and you can of course also open a terminal connection easily to your server, add experimental server patching and terminal access. So there are really many utility features that are not just practical for application deployments and building container images, but also for managing infrastructure, which I think is in some ways great. And in others, it might be a bit annoying because if you're using an existing setup like your own reverse proxy, then you have to find out ways how to disable that and how to make this work with existing configurations. Or if you, for example, like the DNS challenge to get trusted TLS certificates. So yeah, there are pros and cons with this setup. I will tell you in the end what my personal opinion is on this. Let's first of all go through actually deploying applications and managing resources. Yeah, one thing that is really important before you start deploying applications is that you set up a wildcard domain. This of course requires a DNS server with a wildcard record that just forwards everything to your deployment server, so where the traffic reverse proxy will pick it up and forward it to the application container. So this way we can use the Coolify test deploy server with https://home.clcrave.de as a wildcard domain. So then all of your applications that you deploy on this server will get a random or a custom defined subdomain or host entry on this domain, and your DNS server should automatically forward this to the correct IP address. So this is the first project that was already created by Coolify, and then we can create resources. A resource can be anything, like it could be a Git-based application. So that means you store your source code of the application in a Git repository, and then Coolify will build a new container image from the source code of your application, deploy that to one of the deploy servers, so that you as a developer, you don't have to care about infrastructure management and stuff like that. You can also create databases if your application need a Postgres, MySQL, Redis, or MongoDB database. Yeah, you can just deploy them with easy one-click solution, similar like you know it from any cloud vendor. It's super easy. You could also create Docker-based application with a Docker file. So then you choose a server and start typing anything in here. You could also create Docker compose files directly in here. So start typing your compose file that you want to deploy, or you can deploy a Docker image. So I think this is really great because it could replace something like Portainer, for example. So even if you're not a software developer and you don't create your own applications, you can still deploy Docker Compose-based projects and manage them with Coolify. If you prefer to store your Docker Compose files in a Git repository, it's even easier because then you just click on public private repository with GitHub apps or private repository with a deploy key. And then you can start adding your Git repository, your branch, and your build packs. So here you can see it supports static applications, Nix packs, and Docker file or Docker Compose projects. So if you have a Docker Compose file stored on your Git repository, you can just refer to it here, and then Coolify starts building the application. Now, let me demonstrate how that would work. Let's go to my personal projects here. So there I have created a Coolify test application. So this contains not a Docker Compose file, but a Docker file and the source code of an application. This is a very simple demo app that I've just written with AI. So I vibe coded it, of course, yeah. And there you can see all the necessary package files, like the JavaScript stuff, the source code. This is a simple Svelte web-based application using Node.js. And yeah, that of course requires a few source code files for creating certain UI elements and creating some cool and fancy animations and stuff like that. And here in the Docker file, you can see that describes building the application from a simple Node.js Alpine image. So this makes sure that the application dependencies and all the requirements are installed. Yeah, it will run the npm install and create the application from that source code. So again, this is a custom application, but you could also, in theory, just refer to a Docker Compose file that uses a public Docker image, for example, would also work the same way, because Coolify will always try to deploy or build the container application. So yeah, I think this is what we can use. We will use this here. This we will copy and go back to Coolify. Now we need to paste it in the repository URL. So this can be an HTTPS or Git add address. Of course, you need to select the branch. So this way you could also simply just deploy separate testing or staging branches on a different application. So if you want to test new features and later deploy them to production, super useful. But of course, we only have a main branch in here, and we want to select Docker files. So here, the base directory, we don't need that because it's by default root. So that will search for a Docker file in the root directory. So when the Docker file is somewhere else, just define the base directory, and that should be fine. All right, so you can see that this application is still exited because we need, or we can customize a few other settings here. For example, give this application a name. So I'm just going to pick that here, Coolify test app. And then you can also change settings like the domain. Again, this refers to what we have configured on the deploy server, our wildcard domain that will point to the IP address of the server where we're deploying this application, and a traffic reverse proxy will pick it up. We could also customize this random generated name to Coolify test app. I think that is much better. And then we can also customize a few other settings in here. We could automatically push the build image to a container registry. We could also customize the Docker options here, or we could protect this application with an HTTP basic authentication, also nice, or run any post or pre-deployment commands. So that is also super useful. So it has really a lot of interesting settings in here. But I think for now, let's just click on deploy and see what it's doing. So now it's connecting to the GitLab repository. It's cloning the source code, and it's preparing the container build with a helper image. All right, so that was already successful. You can see that the application is already running. So if we go to the logs here, you can also check the application logs, server running at localhost port 3000. And here is the latest deployment of the application. All right, so now that the test application is up and running, let's try to open it. When we go to links, you can see that link that should point to the app. Let's continue, and yeah, let's ignore the certificate warning for now. That's again dependent on the traffic reverse proxy that doesn't work with the HTTP challenge. Let's ignore it for now. And this is my amazing Hello World test application. So this is just a simple click counter where you can reset. So nothing really special, but yeah, it's fine. This demonstrates how you can easily just deploy any type of web-based application on your own hardware infrastructure. Is super cool. And of course, this also works with existing Docker Compose files where you're not creating any source code, but where you're storing configuration settings, or where you want to deploy other type of applications in your home lab as well. So you can use the same principle here. What is also super nice, if you go to advanced, you see an auto deploy function here that can automatically deploy new commits based on Git webhooks. That means when I'm changing the source code of my application and I push the changes to GitLab, then Coolify can automatically pick this up and create a new deployment and automatically inject the code changes into the production deployment app. So that is really nice. And this, of course, also works really great if you're working with separate branches, because then you, again, can create a staging environment for certain code changes before you merge them into the production main branch and stuff like that. By the way, how that works, I haven't really tested this, but this you can easily configure when going to webhooks. This is a deploy webhook where an authentication is required, so that it requires you to enable the API in Coolify, and probably would also work better with trusted TLS certificates. So then you can tell your Git application to execute the new deployment on Coolify as well. And then your application is automatically getting updated. That also works great with version updaters like Renovate, for example. So if you're already familiar with Git and GitOps processes, you might embrace the features of Coolify. You can also add scheduled tasks where you run a specific command with a cron job inside the application container. I think this is also super, super practical for any database backups. Yeah, for example, if you want to regularly take a database dump to store all your entire database configuration or the database entries to a .sql file or something like this, yeah, because then you don't need a sidecar container or any other backup job or something like this. You can easily just run the simple mysql dump or pg dump command inside a scheduled task. Also great. And yeah, of course, you can configure health checks, you can configure resource limits, resource operations, metrics. You can configure rollbacks, and you can even easily deploy this from your primary server to a secondary server. So if you have multiple deployment servers connected to Coolify, you can easily just distribute your app wherever you need it. So there are many, many great things in this Coolify application, and you can really do a lot with that. I think we could just go on and create like a second, a third, a fourth video about this app because it has so many features, and this was just a simple demonstration. But I think I showed you enough to easily get started. And if you want to see something more specific in more detail, then please let me know in the comments, and I can easily create a second or third video on Coolify as well. Yeah, this of course requires further testing from my side, which, by the way, brings me to the last topic I quickly want to talk about before wrapping up, because the question is really, Coolify does a lot of great things, but would I personally use this for my production setup? Honestly, I have mixed feelings on this, because I really like this application. It does a lot of great things. It tries to be this GitOps, Docker, Swiss Army knife with powerful auto deployment for applications. You can easily build and deploy and ship any type of app on any of your custom hardware, yeah, and it comes with really practical features for maintenance, like creating scheduled tasks, creating auto deployments, rollbacks, and Docker cleanup tasks and stuff like that. And it could probably be the perfect all-in-one solution that you might be looking for in a home lab. However, if you're working with Coolify, you also have to accept that this literally becomes your one and only management layer. So when you're deploying any app on your infrastructure, you always have to do it the Coolify way. And if you're like me, you like to work a lot with infrastructure as code tools like GitLab CI or Terraform and Ansible, you likely will already have processes for these features already in place. And sure, you could think about replacing these with Coolify, but why should you? It's not declarative. Everything you have to do through the UI, or maybe, yeah, you can use the API. But honestly, guys, if you already have GitOps, like with GitLab CI or Terraform in place, you can literally do all this stuff on your own. So it really depends on the type of person you are. Yeah, if you're looking for an all-in-one solution where you can do everything, but you have to do it the way the application defines, or if you like a little more freedom and juggle a little more around with scripts and config files and stuff like that, but you can literally do this all on your own if you like. So yeah, that's my final decision. I probably will keep using my current workflow by using GitLab CI, Terraform instead of using Coolify, but hey, who knows? I will still continue running this on my testing servers, and whenever you want to see something or you want me to jump into a specific topic, I can do some researching and do another tutorial if you like. So please tell me your opinion and your suggestions in the comments. Or maybe there's another platform that is similar to Coolify and you want to see comparison video, let me know. And thank you so much for watching. Thanks to all the supporters and members of our community. You guys are amazing and make these videos possible. And of course, I'm gonna catch you in the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.